We will remain a little bit in Syria. It's sort of inevitable that Syria is present among us today. And we'll ask Maria to reflect on these issues from more of a local Syrian perspective and a women's organization. And also considering that this is a crisis that has gone on for years now. And obviously needs, the context changes, needs change, and so on and so forth. So what are the most important aspects we need to consider, Maria?
Thank you very much. Hello? Yeah, okay, perfect. Okay, thank you very much, Johan, and thank you for the invitation. Yes, as you mentioned, I'm coming from a women's rights organization coming from Syria. However, I think that the lessons we learned are applicable everywhere. So I will try to make it more global, but take into account that there is a human here coming from Syria. My part of my family are under bombs right now. So it's quite difficult. I want first of all to clarify 3 points before, and some of them I was very happy to hear from you when you started about the different narratives. Like, I will try to bring some women voices because there is no unified voices. When we are hearing a lot of humanitarian actors about genders or needs of women, to understand that women are not homogeneous group. And Mr. Panos make it very clear the needs of women in Idlib are very different from the one in Damascus, and even in the same community we will have different level of needs. I'm also talking from Syria, which is an ongoing crisis, but also a very highly politicized crisis. So I will bring some examples about how AIDS has been politicized in Syria very much. However, I want to make sure before starting that I totally understand the difficulty of the humanitarian actors. I will bring some critiques, but I know and I understand how difficult it is to build an adequate response, so bear with me. So I will start with a very personal story, 1 minute. And I was studying in France a few years ago when the mayor of Aleppo, liberated area, what he called at that time liberated area out of the Syrian regime control, came to Paris to the National Assembly and present a talk. And he talked about the importance of recognizing the baccalaureate of Syrian students who are out of the regime area. For us Syrians in exile, it was a disaster. You can't come here and talk about this kind of details. It is totally irrelevant. You come here to discuss about political issue, about protection, but talking about this kind of detail at the French National Assembly is totally irrelevant. Now, a few years after, I totally feel and regret my position at that time, when I feel how many Syrian children have lost their future because no mechanisms have been done to recognize their degrees or doesn't have access to education. So it is something I have learned through my work with women now when we start working with establishing women centers who offer different kind of services in different areas of Syria. So we have basic services, psychosocial support, education, and different and vocational training, but also working with the aim to support women agency to be political actors. So we listened to them and built a program based on this. I remember where we were working on an area, besieged area, Haresta, when there were literally nothing. The infrastructure is completely bombed, no clean water, nothing, no food. And we wanted to close our centers because it was totally under a huge risk of being bombed. And I received a WhatsApp message saying, please don't close it. I'm a student at Damascus University, and because of the siege, I can't access my university. I'm coming to the English courses at the center. Even under bombs, for this young woman, education was a priority. It was part of her resilience. So it's also a message I have heard a lot from women in besieged area when we were talking about what needs you have, what are your needs under ceasefires, like armed group and the regime were discussing ceasefires, and we were asking the women, what do you need? And the situation of women was horrible in terms they don't have access to any medicine. They can get their period and don't have anything for it, no food, literally nothing. We have witnesses, women giving birth without any kind of anesthesia, even they are going through a cesarean, having a cesareans under bomb without anesthesia, and they were asking for manuals, for school manuals, because they were afraid that their child joined the army group if they don't have access to education. So yeah, that is part of the relevant needs that we were facing when we were discussing with international aid. And I remember also discussing with one international organization proposing a program for education, and the response was, we work on peace building. And I cannot imagine how we can work on peace building if child doesn't get educations. So I totally understand how much we need to be specialized, but also how we need to be flexible and how we need to have a more diverse response to needs. Yes, another need I have seen very, very relevant and very far from the needs discussed is documentations. When you are talking about Syria and a lot of conflict areas, you have areas who are out of control of any institution, of any institutions. So people got married, got children, got divorced, got dead without any documentations. And we have seen this in Ghouta when people were getting out and mothers were writing the name of their children on their shirt because they were scared of being lost from each other and they don't have any documentation. So documentation is also one priority I have seen very relevant who are not discussed on a first aid level. But when you are talking about long-term conflict, I think it's a very relevant issue. Yeah, as I said, I agree with a lot of points mentioned by Mr. Panos. However, I think we need to discuss more when we are talking about AIDS and how is getting AIDS. In Syria, we have seen examples of how the aid has been politicized and how the UNHCR wasn't able to deliver aid if the Syrian regime doesn't allow it, if the armed group doesn't allow it. So we have been facing situation when some people are getting aid and some other have been punished. I understand we need to go where we have access, but also we have allowed by this system to use AIDS as a weapon of war. And this is very, very, very dangerous, and we really need to reflect on this when we are talking about relevance. Also, my last point before the recommendation will be gender-based violence in our prevention of sexual violence or all of this stuff. When we are talking about in areas when I will not go inside Syria now, when we are having a regime who is the main perpetrator of sexual violence as tool of arms, how we can protect women there. I will not discuss also one area when you don't have any system, but also in refugee community, when the refugee doesn't have any rights, when we have women coming to our centers and we are completely unable to provide any aid. So for me also we need to discuss relevance from paper to the ground. When you go to the paper, I have magnificent process to follow, but at the end I don't have any area when I cannot go to the police, I can't have, so I got stuck. So also when we need sometimes very simple procedure can be more relevant than very good and very beautiful on paper. So very few recommendation, I think I still have one moment, yeah, is from our experience in Syria, MAP actors. In Syria, we have a very good experience led by a Syrian organization called Impact, when they are every 2 years publishing a whole mapping or the different NGO or local organization and initiative who are working. So it's easy when you want to go to an area to look after who is doing what. And being led by Syrian or by local, I think we had been able to to access to a certain area when international can't go. The second point, I already mentioned it, is to be relevant on the ground, not only on papers, which means really discussing the feasibility of our process. The third one will be flexibility. In conflict, we have been suffering a lot between writing proposals and getting the proposal being accepted, and then all the program is not really relevant after 6 months sometime. So being flexible and putting education under peace building is something very important as well. My very last point for me when we are talking about relevance is solidarity. I believe that everyone here in the room, or hopefully most of us, come here because we have a personal story being linked to humanitarian system. So people, affected population, need to see human and not just systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria, for these very important and pertinent points. And not least for us to recognize the priority that people give to education under all circumstances, in any kind of context. And it's so closely linked to the dignity of the human person. And as you say, it also does have a role in terms of longer-term peace building.